I'm going to talk to you about SS Explorer, which is the former fisheries research vessel. It's currently docked in Leith Docks, and the recent work we've been doing for conservation management plan for the SS Explorer Preservation Society, who are based down there. I realise this is now going into the 20th century, which some of you may find it to be squarely in the post-interesting period, but it is worth it. So SS Explorer itself is a rare survivor of a mid-20th century fishing trawler, but also the first purpose-built fisheries research vessel in Scotland and indeed in the UK. Prior to that, they'd all been converted fishing boats. It was built at Alexander Hall and Company in Aberdeen in 1953 to 55, and then commissioned as a fisheries research vessel. It entered service with the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen and worked all the way through to 1984, mostly working in the North Sea, North Atlantic, conducting fisheries and climatic research, as well as testing new fisheries technology. It was saved twice from the scrapyard, once by Aberdeen Maritime Museum and then later by the SS Explorer Preservation Society, before being towed to Leith in 1994, where it has been ever since. The ship's heritage is as a floating lab and a microcosm of mid-20th century society. That is some mid-20th century society for you. You've got a combination of whole different chunks of society. You have young scientists and older scientists on board as well. You then have the social stratification of a lot of ocean-going vessels at the time, between the ship's officers, the ship's crew, the engineers and engine room crew. There was the Black Hand Gang, because they were mostly working with quite heavy fuel oil, and the deckhands fishing crew at the same time. So you've got 4 or 5 different chunks of people who are all spread across this ship in different parts, but it is still quite a small ship, so they're all still working together all the time. You've also got some very cutting-edge science going on, with purpose-built labs within the structure of the fishing of the vessel itself, repurposing some of the fish holds and other areas that you'd have in a normal steam trawler. So why complete a conservation management plan for the ship? The main reason is because SS Explorer Preservation Society are currently trying to put together large-scale funding applications for the ship itself to restore it to be a floating museum. And before you can apply for large chunks of money, the funders want to know you're going to do a good job and actually understand what the ship is, not impact the significance of the ship through the work you're doing, but actually make that enhance that significance of the vessel. And the way we do that is through CMP, Conservation Management Plan, which has 4 major parts. This is all sort of set out in a UNESCO document, and one that's also been put together by National Historic Ships. Part 1 is understanding the assets. So what is the ship itself? What is its heritage? What's its history? What is its physical makeup? How much of that survives? How old are bits? What's still there? What's been removed? What's been knackered? Part 2 is then looking at that and how is that significant in terms of the heritage of the ship, in terms of the associational heritage, in terms of the actual physical and structural material, and bringing that together, sort of an assessment of that significance. Part 3 then looks at issues and policies. So that's looking at the things that are affecting both negatively and positively that significance. And then part 4 is an action plan to enact those policies to essentially either maintain the significance or improve the significance of, I'm going to say the word significance a lot. I'm really sorry. I had to write it so much. But yeah, so to maintain or improve that significance throughout the thing. So part 1, understanding the asset. We went back through to have a look at legal protections, possible legal protections for the ship. One of the biggest problems we have as maritime ship archaeologists is there is no formal legal protection for extant floating or otherwise vessels. They're not scheduled monuments. They're not covered by the Protection of Wrecks Act. They're very rarely covered by the Protection of Military Remains Act. The only real protection comes in local plans if they're discussed there, but they're frequently not because they move about. We also went through a rundown of the actual history of the ship, collected a lot of archival material which the SSEPS already had or was held in organisations like National Museum of Scotland, National Archives, Aberdeen Maritime Museum, that sort of thing. And then we also did a condition survey of the vessel, so that's going through in a compartment by compartment assessment of it with a specially made form for each compartment, doing a photograph survey of the current condition, and making a large-scale ship-specific database, so that the site has all that information about what the condition of each compartment and the overall vessel was at that point in time, which was 2022, I think. Somewhere mid-COVID, all blazed together again. And then we also looked together to identify where the gaps in understanding are. What's missing from the archive material, what's missing from our understanding of the fabric of the ship, and any other associational links that are there for the vessel. And in part two, we take all that information and we look at which bits are specifically quite significant. How do you rank that significance over the whole vessel? And we do that against evidential value, so what is actually there in terms of artifacts, in terms of the particularly well-preserved cabins or other compartments. Functional values, so how does it go against other examples? Are there other examples? For instance, it's the first purpose-built fishery research vessel. It's also the only extant surviving one, apart from the one that's in use at the moment, Scotia. And it's also a rare example of a mid-20th century fishing trawler. There are a few others that are specifically fishing trawlers, like the Arctic Corsair and the Ross Tiger down in Grimsby and Hull. But they are specifically purpose-built fishing vessels, not research vessels. They don't have all the scientific equipment and stuff on board. What's also true is that Explorer is one of the very first ships to go to sea with a computer, Elliott Hydroplot. Like look how impressive our computer is. It goes on a fishing boat. Hooray! But there's real cutting-edge technology being used in this vessel, and it's then developed more widely into the wider fishing fleets and more widely into marine activities. And then there's associational value. Were there particularly important scientists on board? Were there particularly important people on board? Where does it link to? How does it link to places? It was quite an important part internationally of the UK's soft power, particularly around the North Atlantic. So we look for all those different bits and bobs. Yeah. What do we find? We go do the condition survey. There are some really cracking bits. Like, heavily recommend anybody and everybody to go and see the ship. It's fantastic. You walk through bits of it, and you're like, I could be in the 1950s or 60s, and a member of crew could come in the corner. Incredible. Some of the cabins are as they were left when the ship was decommissioned in 1984. So that's really cool. You don't have to remake any of that stuff. You just have to protect it. And it's really significant for anybody wandering around to actually understand, get a feel for the ship. That's not the case for the whole ship. There are some whacking great holes, largely due to breakdowns in the outer fabric of the ship, allowing in rainwater, which causes massive destruction to some parts of the cabin. So that is, I haven't taken a photo of it because it's actually the bottom of the photo, but there's a big hole in the deck, just in front of that bit of rotten deck there. And then you can see the deck head at the top starting to fall down because water was getting in through the skylights and then pooling on top of the deck head, running through, rotting all the pine blanking beneath. They've done a lot of work in the last few years to make the overall structure of the ship wind and watertight and to stop pigeons getting in. It was quite a big problem. And seagulls, because it's in leaf docks and they're everywhere. You've also got some material that got lost to scrapyards, and you've got some material that got lost when the Boa Eskil, which is an offshore supply vessel, decided to clatter into the ship when it was in the Cromarty Firth in 1993. However, that was actually a mixed blessing, because while it did destroy the port lifeboat and also put that great big dent into the hull there, moving some of the overdeck as well, the insurance payout enabled the Explorer Preservation Society to get the money together to tow it to Leith, which has protected it ever since, because Leith Docks is brackish. There's less wear and tear on the hull. There's less chemical reactions to break down what is already an overly thick steel hull because it was designed for Arctic waters. So that's the reason, even though the ship has not been dry docked since 1984, so no one has done any work to the outside hull since 1984, it's still afloat. If someone could check their phone to see if it hasn't sunk, it should be fine. So the Explorer site do quite regular thickness testing on the outside blanking using ultrasound, and it's still remarkably quite intact. what remains, so if we go through to significance, that is the top of the triple expansion steam engine, which is still in place. The whole of the engine rooms in the ship are still in place. And that is the reason that the Aberdeen Maritime Museum, when they went to the Keithing, where it was about to be scrapped, they wanted to go and get that engine because it's a fantastic demonstration of an Aberdeen-built triple expansion steam engine from the mid-20th century. They didn't have that in their museum. They wanted it. They saw the whole ship. They're like, oh man, let's have the whole ship. It's fantastic. Get involved. And it's still all there.
Asbestos. Everything's asbestos.
It's all covered. And it is, like, they've got a big asbestos survey that's demonstrated where it is and isn't. So there are chunks of the ship that are just perfect. And the SSEPS does a lot of work over weekends, on Tuesdays, to keep that in place. Functional value, it is a trawler, but it's also a science ship. So you've got this competing two functions, which are essentially make it unique as a historic vessel within the UK, and I think potentially globally. I don't think there's another fishery research vessel similar to this that's been preserved, because they tend to just get chopped up once they finish their lives. Association value, you've got some very, very famous marine scientists who started their careers as baby scientists on the vessel, including a guy called Professor Bob Kabata, who not only was a Polish war hero, resistance hero during the Second World War, then came to Scotland in the 50s and ended up doing a degree at Aberdeen in marine biology, largely because he broke his leg and wasn't able to go to sea. So he did a marine biology degree and became emeritus professor in Canada eventually. But also, during his time on SS Explorer, he was a marine parasitologist, so studying marine parasites. And he assumes what I believe is everyone's dream, which is to have a marine parasite named after him. And that's all. It's all associated with Explorer. You also got some of the very pioneering women in marine science working on Explorer as well, much to the chagrin of the fishing crew, who didn't like the idea of women on board at all. Although they lost that argument quite strongly. Captain didn't put up with that. So you've got a lot of connections with scientific research, marine biology, and climate science throughout the really crucial period of the mid-20th century, when they're going out collecting lots of information about the changing oceans that contributes an awful lot to modern scientific understanding of climate science. Social differences within this. This is the officers' saloon. It is lovely. They've got whiskey. It's really nice. It is beautiful. It's all still preserved. Officers and scientists were allowed in there. The junior scientists were at one end, which is slightly less nice chairs. And then at the far end, you've got the really nice chairs for the captain, the chief engineer, lead scientists. You also have the lead scientist has a cabin all to himself or herself, with space for microscopes, with space for experimentation gear. It's all like a decent sized thing for a ship, considering how big it is. You go down to junior scientists, there's 3 of them in a small box. And then you go down to the fishing crew and the Black Hand Gang in the engine room. There's 6 of them in a small box. There's also a point where the corridor that goes between the forepart of the ship back to the engine room, the engine room crew are all in the bow, in the forepart of the ship, because that's the bit that goes up and down the most, so you get really, really seasick there. Don't know why you want your engineers to be seasick, but fine. They were not allowed to go from their accommodation to the engine room through that corridor unless it was really bad weather. So they had to go up over the top and down, unless it was gale force and they were likely to be swept off the ship. So there's really interesting social class divides, which are emblematic of the mid-20th century, but are still preserved within the overall fabric of the ship. And then associational international variation links. You've got the ship had very strong relations with Norway, because they were docking in the ports in Norway when they were doing their work. They were a really important part of soft power and a soft British influence in the Faroes, largely because they were allowed to bring booze in, not to go onto the Faroes, because you couldn't bring that in there, but they did have lots of parties for the local Faroese on board when they were docked there, which were very popular. So you've got, again, spreading the goodwill of Britain across the world, or at least the goodwill of Scotland. It's got a lot of correlations to Aberdeen-built ships. There's not very many Aberdeen-built historic vessels that survive. One of them is in Galveston, just a tea clipper. And then there's also the potential for really good outreach in terms of engineering, heritage, and science around Leith and around Edinburgh. So they really want to develop those links within the local community as well. What are we going to do with it? What are the problems, and how are we going to deal with that? So essentially what we're going to look at is what are the issues affecting the ship, how is it breaking down, and how can we put policies in place to negate that. First of all, as I said, there's no protection to historic vessels as heritage assets by law in anything. The National Historic Fleet and the National Register of Historic Vessels are useful, but they are not a legal document. They're not a legal protection. Explorers on National Historic Fleet, I think, which is the more significant. These are the boats people need to keep because they are emblematic of Britain's importance as a maritime power. The way we're going to go through the policies is to look at conservation framework, which is basically how policies and management styles that we use to keep the ship, to conserve the ship itself, and then the actual conservation practices, sort of day-to-day conservation. So from a conservation framework, you need to look at what conservation gateway are you going to go through to conserve the ship. Is it going to be an active seagoing vessel, in which case you need to make some considerations for modern marine safety standards? Is it going to be a stationary historic vessel, a museum ship, not leaving the ports, in which case you don't need to have anywhere near as many marine safety standards. You just need to stop it sinking in these docks, which Fourth Ports are also quite keen on preventing that as well. Or is it going to be stored ashore? That means you don't have breakdown from it being at sea all the time, but all ships, particularly wooden vessels, are designed to be supported all the way around by water. And so you see something like Discovery, they're having serious problems with the movement of the hull because then it's all protected by shoring as opposed to having an equal pressure all the way around. So you've got to decide that. SSEPS, it's going to be a floating museum ship. Fine. That solved a big problem. We don't have to do marine safety standards. We just have to do normal safety standards for, we're going to have people on board. So fire safety, that's setting out a vision for the ship. So that is their vision. The vision is that the ship will be a museum ship to highlight marine science, climate science, Scottish engineering, and the history of the vessel overall. Designing the conservation philosophy, are we going to go for full restoration, everything back to how it was at a certain time period? Are we going to have more like recreation? Are we going to have trying to preserve it as it is now? They've gone for restoring certain pieces to certain time periods, essentially looking at when the most significant part of that cabin is, the most significant time for that cabin is. And then how are you going to improve or maintain access to the vessel? Problem with most marine ships, it's quite difficult to get things in place for disabled access, for that sort of stuff. How do you make sure people can get on board the ship and make it accessible to everyone? And how do you interpret that for as many people as possible? That's their mission statement, vision, etc. Fully restored, public accessible berth in the port of Leith. Shoreside interpretations is that helps with some of the access issues. As a maritime museum, marine science educational resource. Lovely stuff. Yeah. I've already said an awful lot of that. There's an awful lot of archive material that they have within their physical archives. They're not digitized. There's also archive material all over other archives, National Archives, Aberdeen Maritime Museum, NMS. We still have some of the original samples from the scientific work, and that needs to be improved. Access to that needs to be improved either through digitization or through making it more available with the partner organizations. Governance understanding. So, yep, they're going to set up specialist working groups to look at certain things. The most important one is the stakeholder liaison group. The most important one is the dry docking thing. That's the most important thing that needs to happen next. They're going to go through a series of things like developing a ship interpretation and presentation plan, SIP, which basically says this is going to be in this department, this is going to be in this department, this is going to be in this department, and why it's there and why it's significant. Stakeholder engagement with partners like Fourth Ports, Edinburgh City Council. They invited us to a very nice drinks reception. That was good stakeholder engagement. That went well. How do they improve and maintain significance? That's getting that archive material out there. Recording all history of the ship's crew and scientists. That is, there's still some people surviving who are on board. So getting that together as a useful resource. Cataloguing the stores and artifacts on board, that's still not been done. Is a really important thing because there's lots of stuff that just, you open a cupboard and bits of important scientific equipment sort of fall out at you. So that is, again, in train, they're getting a working group doing that as well. And then a measured survey of the ships. There's not been a 3D scan or updated survey of the ships since the ship's plans were made in the 1950s. Conserving the ship, actually conserving the fabric. This is them trying to stop water going into the top of the deck house, main accommodation bit. So that's closing gaps in understanding in terms of increasing significance, keeping the actual watertight envelope of the ship watertight, which is quite important, and then a recording system for when they're doing works, because prior to this original thing, there wasn't really anything for them to say, this is what an area looked like before we started on it. How do we return it to not this, but a similar sort of layout, a similar sort of setup? So that's all now in place. Keeping the water out, yep, really important. The stabilization plan was done by us and them in 2017, which identified the priority list of work that needs to be done, which they've worked through really well. And then putting into place maintenance schedules for the ship itself and the work. When do we need to do tank soundings? When do we need to do ultrasound tests on plank plating thicknesses and that sort of stuff? When they do some fairly sizable work on the ship, we've asked them to do heritage impact assessments. We've given them a bit of training on how to do that. Essentially, that's working out what is going to happen when we change this and how do we record it to make sure that essentially following the archaeological process. If you were doing it on an excavation or a survey, you're just doing it on a ship. And that's been quite successful. There's also then, they're currently in the middle of doing planning for an interim dry docking just to get the hull up to standard. And then there's the major refit to actually make it into a full museum ship that's a bit further down the line, but again, being planned. That's all stuff I've said. Good. Move on. Maintenance schedule, yep. So again, putting together the key areas of bits that might fall on people or bits that might be vital to keep in the same place. And part of that is a review of the CMP and action plan in 5 to 10 years, make sure everything still remains current and actually remains useful for the vessel. The next immediate steps they want to do is dry docking, which will probably be at Dales in Leith because it's very difficult to get the ship out of Leith. It's stuck. You have to tow it somewhere, and there's a limited number of dry docks that will take the ship. Part of the problem is actually that there are very few dry docks that are either big enough to take that sort of size vessel or, more importantly, cheap enough. The really big dry docks, they're very expensive, and they have clients who are able to pay lots of money to keep their survey vessels or whatever it is operational. They want them in and out really quickly. When you've got something like Explorer or in Dundee Unicorn, you need to be thinking about how do we actually have a maintenance schedule that can be done most cost effectively and also without taking an entire dry dock out of commission for the next 3 years. Because if they also can't use their dry dock for 3 years, they're going to charge a fortune, understandably, rightly so. And then development of the ship works close. Ship interpretation and presentation plan. It's going to be a very good. Anyway, I hope that's just a really quick tour of Explorer and what we've done. I heavily recommend you go and have a walk around. They do tours on Saturdays and Tuesdays. You can't take people who are under 16 because it's an active port and port access laws and stuff. But if you do want to go, give Scott an email. It's fantastic. I'd recommend it.